In today's tutorial, we're going to be continuing our looping series by creating this really cool frequency animation where we get some nice rings coming from the center and evolving over time. I'm really excited about this one because we're going to be using some plugins and effects that we haven't used before and in ways that you may not expect. As always, these are stock plugins and I'm making these as easy and as approachable as possible. So let's go ahead and open up After Effects and let's get going. Alright guys, so we're over here in After Effects. I'm excited about today's tutorial. It's going to be fun. As always, I just want to thank you all for being here, for watching through these with me, for learning After Effects with me. It really means the world. So let's get started on this. So as always, we're going to start with a new composition. So I'm going to go ahead and go new composition. Pull this over. And we're going to name this base for a base animation. 1920 by 1080. We'll go 30 frames per second on this, and I'm actually going to make this loop 20 seconds instead of 30. So we got our comp settings all ready to go, so let's hit OK. This animation is going to be based off of 2 shape layers that we're going to make 3D layers, and then 1 camera, and that'll be the base animation, and then we'll pull that into a main comp and add all our effects. So let's go ahead and get started with our first shape layer. I'm going to right click in our timeline, go New, Shape Layer. And let's go ahead and name this shape layer Rings 1. And we're going to twirl this down and let's go over to Add and add an ellipse here. And we'll twirl down ellipse and let's set this to 500 by 500. It'll automatically do that if we have that linked up there. I'm going to twirl up ellipse path, and I'm going to go back to add and add a stroke. I'm going to twirl down the stroke, and this is going to kind of be the base color of our bottom rings. So instead of white, we're going to do maybe like a soft blue, somewhere around here. I'm going to actually type in the hex code down here. You can follow along. So the blue that I'm using is 6985FF. Hit OK. And on our stroke width, let's change that to 5 instead of 2. And I think that's all we're going to do on our stroke for now. So I'm going to go ahead and twirl it up. And then we're going to add one more thing to our shape layer. So I'm going to go to Add and Repeater. I'm going to twirl down Repeater. On my copies, let's go 30. And let's go ahead and twirl down our transform repeater 1. And on my position, I'm going to change that from 100 to 0 on the X. And on the scale, let's make this 60%. So 60 by 60. And you'll see why we're making that in a second. And we're going to animate this offset real quick to make this thing move. So the first value I'm going to type in is -9. And let's go ahead and set that keyframe, making sure that our playhead is right at the beginning here at 0 frames, 0 seconds. And I'm going to go over to 20 seconds, which is right at the end, so our last frame. I'm going to type in -15. And I think that's all we need to do with our rings right now for our base layer on our rings 1. So I'm going to go ahead and twirl up my whole rings layer. And my second shape layer I'm going to create, I'm going to right click, New, Shape Layer. I'm going to twirl this down. Let's first rename this. So I'm going to name this Rings 2. And let's go ahead and add ellipse. Let's twirl down ellipse. And same thing, we're going to go 500, making sure that it's linked up, 500 by 500. I'm going to twirl in my ellipse path and go to Add Stroke. And let's twirl that down. And for this one, we're going to leave that at white. And for the stroke width, we're going to leave that at 2 because we want that difference in the top and bottom rings. So what we're going to add to this one is some dashes. And that's how we're going to get kind of those dashed lines coming off the top layer there. So you can see dashes right here. How this works is we're going to hit this plus icon. We're going to add dashes to these rings. And right now it defaults to 10. And if I zoom in here, let me see if I can swallow this. If I zoom in, you can see there is going to be 10 pixels in between each dash, if that makes sense. So the more I scale up, the more pixels are going to be in between each dash. So it defaults to 10. What I want it to be, though, I want it to be smaller. So I'm actually going to set this to 5. And you can see that now we have some nice evenly spaced dashes with smaller gaps in there. And that's good on the stroke. So I'm going to twirl that stroke up. I'm going to unsolo this layer. And I'm going to go ahead and add a repeater, just like we did to the other one. And I'm going to twirl down this repeater. And same thing, we're going to have 30 copies. And we're going to use pretty much the same values as we did. So I'm going to twirl down transform repeater 1. On the position, change that from 100 to 0. On our scale for this one, if you remember on rings 1, we set that to 60%. This one, we're going to go a little smaller, so I'm going to go 40% on each of these. So 40 by 40, making sure that's like that. And then on our rotation, we're going to drop this down to -7, just slightly, but you'll see where this comes into play. It's actually going to add some rotation into our movement here, which will be really nice as those dashed lines are coming off these blue lines. So let's twirl up the repeater 1, and we're going to animate this as well, and we're going to use the same values as we did on the first one. So making sure our playhead is right at the beginning, 0 frames, 0 seconds. We're going to go -9 and make sure that stopwatch is clicked so these keyframes are active. And then take our playhead all the way to the end, 20 seconds, and -15. Let's twirl up repeater 1. And I'm going to twirl up the shape layer as a whole. So my next step here is to turn these 3D so we can get that camera in. And so how we just turn these 2 layers 3D is pretty simple. We have our 3D icon right here, and this just turns it into a 3D layer so a camera can pick up the data from it. So all we got to do is click those little boxes right there. If you don't see that, come right down here to toggle switches and modes and click that. Maybe this is your view right here. Just click that toggle switches and modes, and that should pop up for you. I'm going to go ahead and right click, go to new camera. And whatever it's defaulted on is fine. I have mine at 50 millimeters. Everything else is fine. We'll just leave that at camera 1. That's it, okay. And I'm going to twirl this camera down. And twirl down transform. And on our point of interest here, we're going to go 977. We're just bumping ourselves over to the left there a little. And on our y-axis, we're going to go 581.5. And we're just coming up here a little. And the z-axis is where that 3D positioning really lives. And so I'm going to go -47.2. And now that we have those set, let's go ahead and go with our positions. And this is where we're really going to see that perspective come into play. So on our X position, let's go 1201.7. On our Y position, let's go 3157.3. You can start seeing that take shape here. And then on our Z position, let's go -699.8. So everything's looking pretty good here. Let's go ahead and tweak a few more values that's really going to set us up for the effects. So I'm going to twirl up my transform. And I'm going to twirl down these camera options, and we're going to add some depth of field here. So you can see right here, we have this option depth of field. It's defaulted to off. I'm going to turn that on. On our focus distance, we're just going to bump this up to 2800. Nothing too crazy, but we're going to crank this aperture way, way up so we can get it super shallow for it to pick up these lines here. So I'm going to turn this to 700, and you can see now we're getting those nice, smooth, blurry lines here. I'm going to twirl up camera options. I'm going to twirl up my camera. And like I said, we're going to revisit our rings 2 shape layer here because we want to separate these dashed rings from the blue rings. You can see right now they're in the same plane, and it's looking a little flat. It still looks really good. If I kind of scrub through that, it's looking really good, but I want that separation of the dashed lines. So we're just going to raise those up a little. So let's go ahead and twirl down our rings 2. And I'm going to twirl up contents right there. And I'm actually going to use this main transform layer on these rings 2. So I'm going to twirl down transform. And on the Z position, let's make that -85. And one more thing we're going to add to this is just a little rotation. So making sure our playhead's at 0 frames, 0 seconds. Let's go ahead and click our stopwatch on Z rotation. Activate those keyframes, and we're at 0 revolutions, 0 degrees. So we're right at the beginning of this. And I'm going to take this all the way to the end, 20 seconds, and let's put in 89. So we're not going to go the full 90 degrees because once it hits 90, we're going to be right back here at the beginning. So if I play through the end here, you can see my playhead loop back to the beginning, and we didn't miss any frames. So we have our base animation set up. That's all we have to do in this. So I'm going to twirl brings to, and we're good to go. Nice and tidy. So our next step is one more comp. And for this one, it's just going to be our render comp, and we'll just add the effects in there. So let's go ahead and make a new comp. So I'm going to click our new comp icon right here. And it's going to be the same as our base comp. We're going to name this render. 1920 by 1080, 30 frames a second. 20 seconds long. Let's hit OK. I'm going to go up to my project panel here and grab my base layer and just drag it into my render comp. And we're going to use adjustment layers to get all our effects on here, keep our project nice and organized, keep our timeline really organized as well. So I'm going to right click, new adjustment layer, right click, new adjustment layer, right click, new adjustment layer. All right, got our 6 adjustment layers here. Thanks for sticking with me through that. And let's go ahead and name these according to each effect we're going to put on it. So on our adjustment layer 1 here, I'm going to name this one soft clone. On adjustment layer 2, I'm going to name this middle light. On adjustment layer 3, I'm going to name that glow. On adjustment layer 4, distortion. 5 is going to be CC for color correction. And 6 is going to be vignette. Okay, cool. So now that we have those named, let's start adding the effects according to each adjustment layer. So I'm going to click on soft clone here, and the effect we're going to use is called CC light rays. It's going to pull up there. With our soft clone layer selected, I'm going to double click. For the sake of time, I'm going to just share the values that I used, but feel free to experiment through all of this later on. So on our intensity, I'm going to drop this to 75. On our center, I'm going to change this to 968 by 530. On our radius, I'm going to crank this all the way to 2500. On our warp softness, let's turn that to 100. Right here on our transfer mode, I want to set this to lighten. If I play through this, you can see we kind of get this nice clone coming off of these rings. So initially we only had this one ring, but if you can see right in here, I'm going to zoom in, we have these clones coming right off of these rings, which is really nice with a cool effect. So I call that soft clone. It's really just duplicating the light here, but it gives it a nice effect coming off of those. So I'm going to pause that. And that's all we're going to do on the soft clone. So I'm going to click on our middle light. And for our middle light, I'm going to use CC Light Sweep. And here's another light plugin. And so making sure middle light is selected, I'm going to double click on CC Light Sweep. And now that that's on there, on our center, let's go 664 by 210. The direction's fine there. On our shape, I'm going to change that to smooth. On our width, we're going to go from 50 to 384. You can see that brighten that up a whole lot more. On our sweep intensity, let's just bump that a little to 35. On our edge intensity, I'm going to go 122. And on our edge thickness, let's go 16.10. So let's move on to our glow adjustment layer. I'm going to click on that. And over here in effects and presets, I'm going to type in glow. And making sure the glow layer is selected, I'm going to double click glow. We're going to keep this at color channels. On our threshold, I'm going to drop this way down to 8.2. On our glow radius, I'm going to take this way up to 570. And that's going to give us those nice soft glows. And on our intensity, I'm just going to bump this just a little, 1.2. And we're going to leave all this the same, but on the phase here, I'm going to go to 84. And just on our color A, where we have this white glow on that channel, I'm going to turn that kind of more into that bluish, but maybe leaning more towards a teal to give it a brighter look. And so it'll be right in this range somewhere, but I'll go ahead and give you the hex code for this. I'm using 06D1CB. Hit OK. So you can't really see much of it yet, but we will once we get into the color correction portion of it. So I'm going to twirl up glow, and let's go to distortion here. I'm going to click that one. And over here in distortion, we're going to use an effect called CC Lens right here. And with our distortion layer selected, I'm going to double click CC Lens. Not too much to do here. We're going to just set our size to 159. Kind of bring it back full screen and kind of warp those edges here. And our convergence, I'm going to drop down to 25. And we're going to add one more effect on our distortion layer here. So I'm going to twirl up CC Lens, and over here, I'm just going to add a ripple. So making sure your distortion layer is still selected, I'm going to double click that. And on our radius, let's set that to 10. You can see right in the middle there, it's kind of rippling out. And on our type of conversion, let's change this from asymmetric to symmetric. And so it's going to give us smoother lines here on those ripples. On our wave speed, we're going to leave that at 1. The width, we're going to change that from 20 to 75. And on our height, let's drop that from 20 to 10. So if I play through this, I'm going to zoom in. You see how that ripple's kind of bouncing up and down here? It gives it some nice organic movement right in here as it kind of spreads out throughout the rest of the animation. So I'm going to pause that. Let's move on to our color correction here. So I'm going to click CC, and over in effects and presets, we're going to use 3 different plugins here, 3 different effects. My first one is Vibrance, and it's color correction vibrance right here. So making sure our CC adjustment layer selected, I'm going to double click Vibrance, and I'm going to change the vibrance to 100. On our saturation, I'm just going to bump that to 25. I'm going to twirl up that vibrance. I'm going to go back over here, type in levels, making sure we're on our CC layer. I'm going to find that levels right here under color correction, double click. And not much going on in here. The only thing I'm going to do is change this gamma from 1 to 0.85. I'm going to twirl up levels. And then our last one on our CC adjustment layer is going to be color offset. You can see that here under color correction, CC color offset. So I'm going to double click that. And all we're going to do on this one, on our green phase, I'm going to type in 45. And on our blue phase, I'm going to type in 90. And we get some good gradients coming in here now. It's not just that blue and white contrast, but we're getting some nice yellows, some greens that's fading out into those blues. This is looking really, really good. So I'm going to go back over here to color offset, twirl that up. So I want to do one more thing just to kind of give it that nice soft glow coming off these colors now that we have those in place. I'm going to come back down to glow here. And on our composite original setting here, right now the glow is set to behind. I want to change it to on top. And on our glow colors, we have that original color. So right now it's pulling from the colors in here. And we set that teal in our color A and color B. So let's go ahead and change that from original colors to A and B colors. And now we get that nice soft glow coming off of there. If I play through that, yeah, that's looking great. You can see where we get that kind of light sweep coming in here that we set, that middle light. And you can see that glow pulling that teal that we put right in place there. So one last thing we're going to do is on our vignette. Let's go ahead and click that. And we're just going to soften our edges right here. They're a little harsh as these rings come off. So I'm going to go over here and type in vignette. With our vignette layer selected, I'm going to double click that. And let's just change some of the values here. On the amount, let's go 150. And the angle of view, I'm going to go to 65. And on our center, we're going to move this over a little so it's not right on the center. So I'm going to drop this to 824 by 336. And on our pin highlights, I'm going to go to 50. You can see with this vignette now, we're kind of softening right along here and keeping the nice bright lights right in the middle here. This is looking great, nice and seamless, very smooth. We got these dash lines kind of radiating off as the base of these blue circles is coming off really nicely. You can see our clones, you can see this light bursting through here. If I zoom in, you can see that ripple, and then we're gonna near the end and seamlessly go right back to the beginning. So this is a perfect 20-second loop. Lots of uses with this. You can go through, change colors, change glows. Definitely invite you to explore this project a bit more. Well, that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this whole thing. I really enjoyed making this, and I hope you did too. I hope you're able to learn some new tips and tricks. I hope you're able to learn how things interact with each other and different uses of plugins that maybe you hadn't used before or maybe you use differently. Especially on soft clone, I think that's a really nice way to use that light rays. But as always, I'd love to see what you're making. So if you want to say hi, go over to my Instagram at Timmy Dwyer. You can find that link in the description. And I'd love to see what you're making. You can use the hashtag Timmy Dwyer if you make this loop so I can see it. I'd love to share in the fun with you on there. So thanks again for being here. I hope you all have the best day, and I'll see you on the next one.